All right, let's dive into one of the most critical periods in modern Indian history, the fall of the Mughal Empire. Now, this isn't just a story about an empire collapsing. It's really about the massive power vacuum that opened up, a vacuum that completely changed the course of history. It set the stage for new regional kingdoms and, you guessed it, eventually a foreign power to step in. So to really get this, we've got to start by looking at the empire when it was at its absolute peak.
So picture this. It's 1707, the year Emperor Aurangzeb dies. At this very moment, the Mughal Empire is at its absolute largest. I mean, just look at the map. It's a true giant, stretching all the way from Kashmir down into the Deccan, covering nearly the entire subcontinent. On paper, this thing looked absolutely invincible. This was peak Mughal power right here. And that brings us to the big question, the one we're really digging into today. An empire this huge, one that took centuries to build. How did it fall apart so fast? I mean, what were the hidden cracks in this massive structure that nobody saw coming? Okay, so to get to the bottom of that, here's our game plan. We'll start at the peak, then look at the first signs of trouble, the seeds of decline. After that, we'll get into the era of puppet kings, meet the real power players, the kingmakers, and finally, see what new power rose from the ashes.
So, first up, let's talk about the empire at its peak. But before we get into the nitty-gritty of what happened and how it happened, let's tackle the why, and specifically why this is an absolutely crucial topic if you're preparing for your UPSC exams. And hey, you don't have to take my word for it. The data really speaks for itself here. If you look at the trend analysis for both prelims and mains, it's clear. Modern Indian history, especially this 18th century transition, is a super high-yield topic. Seriously, getting a solid grip on the Mughal decline is fundamental if you want to score well.
All right, now for the main event. Let's get into the analytical heart of this explainer. The seeds of decline. We're going to untangle this complex web of causes, looking at everything that was going wrong both inside and outside the empire. You know, when you look at why the empire fell, historians have two main schools of thought. First, there's the Mughal-centric view. These guys say, hey, look inward. The problems were all internal, a broken system, bad leadership. Then you've got the region-centric view, which points the finger at the provinces, saying instability and new ambitions out there were the real problem. But honestly, it's not one or the other. The two were totally connected. The decay at the center basically gave the green light for the regions to break away. Look, there's no single smoking gun here. It was more like death by 1,000 cuts. You had these endless, messy wars for the throne every time an emperor died. Aurangzeb's Deccan campaigns cost a fortune, and then you had a whole string of really weak rulers. That's all the internal stuff. But then you also had nobles fighting each other, local landlords switching sides, and regions wanting to go their own way. But if you had to point to one single internal problem, a kind of slow poison that was rotting the empire from the inside out, it would have to be the Jagirdari Crisis. Okay, the Jagirdari Crisis. This is a super important concept for your exams, so let's get this straight. Think of it this way. The empire paid its top officials not with cash, but with land grants called jagirs. But the problem was they kept creating more nobles, more jagirdars, but they weren't getting any more land. So you had too many people wanting a slice of a pie that wasn't getting any bigger. This led to insane rivalry, it made the emperor look weak, and even worse, the nobles started squeezing the peasants on their land for every last drop because they didn't know how long they'd hold that jagir. It just completely wrecked the economy from the ground up. And you know, this internal decay, it was most obvious when you looked at the quality of the leaders themselves. Which brings us perfectly to our next section, the era of puppet kings. It's time to meet these so-called later Mughals, the guys who were technically in charge while the empire was falling apart. I mean, this timeline says it all, doesn't it? It's just sheer chaos. After Aurangzeb died in 1707, the throne basically became a revolving door. And get this, look at the year 1719. The emperor changed multiple times in a single year. This wasn't a proper succession. It was a total free-for-all with these weak emperors being put on the throne and then knocked off by powerful nobles whenever they felt like it. And with these weak rulers came some truly terrible policies. A perfect example is the Ajara system. What was it? Well, it was basically revenue farming. The government would sell the right to collect taxes to whoever bid the most money. Can you imagine? The state just washed its hands of this responsibility. It was a desperate cash grab, and it encouraged the absolute worst kind of oppression, destroyed farming, and totally broke the trust between the people and their rulers. So, with the emperors being so weak, a huge power vacuum opened up right at the very top. And that leads us to our next part, the rise of the Kingmakers.
This is the moment when powerful nobles went from just supporting potential emperors to creating them. The Mughal court at this time was completely paralyzed by infighting. I mean, it was a mess. The nobles were split into these rival gangs based on where they were from. You had the Iranis from Persia, the Turanis from Central Asia, and the Hindustani party. This rivalry was so intense, the court just became a hotbed of conspiracies, where everyone was looking out for themselves, not the empire. And rising out of this chaotic mess were two brothers, two of the most powerful men of the age, the Sayyid Brothers, Abdullah Khan and Hussein Ali Khan. They were the leaders of that Hindustani party, and they got so powerful that everyone started calling them the Kingmakers. They were the real rulers, pulling the strings from behind the curtain. And their strategy? It was an absolute masterclass in power politics. Step 1. Put your own puppet on the throne. That was Farrukhsiyar. Step 2. In return, grab the two most powerful jobs in the empire for yourselves, the prime minister and the head of the army. Step 3. Build alliances with powerful groups like the Rajputs and Marathas. And step 4. Crush anyone who gets in your way. And their power became so total that when their puppet emperor Farrukhsiyar tried to stand up for himself, they had him thrown off the throne, blinded, and then killed. Just think about that. This was a massive shock. For the very first time in Mughal history, an emperor was murdered by his own nobles. The magic and authority of the throne? Gone. Shattered. Everyone now knew where the real power was. Okay, so the emperor's authority is in tatters. The empire is breaking apart. All this internal chaos was bound to have huge consequences on the outside. And that brings us to our final, crucial section. A new power emerges. Right in the middle of all this instability, remember that puppet emperor, Farrukhsiyar? Well, he was desperate for any ally he could find to push back against the nobles. And in his desperation, he made a decision that would change India forever. In 1715, he gave a series of royal edicts to the English East India Company. And these weren't just any old grants. They were so important that they've been called the Magna Carta of the company. I mean, the privileges he gave them were just staggering. Let's take Bengal, the richest province. The company got duty-free trade for just 3,000 rupees a year. That's nothing. Plus, the coins they made in Bombay were now accepted as legal money across the entire empire. This was way more than a trade deal. This was the economic launchpad for the British Empire in India, and it was all handed over by a weak emperor who was backed into a corner. Which leaves us with one last big question to think about. When you look at those deep structural problems like the Jagirdari Crisis, do you think the empire's fall was inevitable? Was it doomed to fail? Or could a strong, smart leader have steered the ship through the storm and saved it? Was it the system that was broken or the people in charge? That's really the core of the debate, and it's something to chew on. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.